This is Mind Wars. I'm Chris Ryan, and on today's show, I'd like to welcome back Kevin Annett. Kevin has previously been on the show in which we've done an episode named Child Torture at the Hands of the Beast, the Vatican and the Church. If you haven't seen it, please do check it out. It's definitely worth watching. Or if you like to listen to the audio version, you can get it on Spotify and all the other great podcasting channels. But today I have Kevin back, and he's simply going to talk about a very important subject called common law. Kevin, welcome back. And how have you been since we spoke last?
Well, it's good to be back, Chris. Thanks. Well, like a lot of people, we've been embroiled in this whole COVID nonsense and the restrictions, and we find that common law and the right of people to defend their rights is all the more important right now. So,
yes.
Active, yeah.
As I say, definitely a very important time to come in to get against this insane measure that's been enforced upon the nation worldwide in a global sense. But I suppose, first of all, in the previous show, we went through your background, so there's no need to go through the background itself because it can be quite long. But just for this particular subject, where do you get your expertise, or where do you fall into it over so many years of common law itself?
Well, part of it, the best teacher is life, of course. Kind of winding back in time, for the last 20 years, as you know, I've been involved in this whole campaign trying to get justice for survivors of church crimes within the court system, learning how difficult that is, and especially in the so-called crown system, in Canada and England and elsewhere. But before that, when I was younger, I studied law. I didn't finish law school, but even then, when I was trained to be a lawyer, I could see that the whole system was very rigged and designed to keep people unaware of their inherent sovereign liberties. Now, in places like the US Constitution, that's laid out that people are born with inherent liberties and no government can take them away. But we have this whole legacy coming out of Rome, really, Roman law that says, well, you're basically property. You have certain restricted privileges or rights that the government can take away at any point, and you can't say anything about it. Those are two very different notions of law. One is that you're governed, and another is that you're self-governing. And the self-governing system is really what common law is all about. In the last, not only struggling to bring out justice for these children who are murdered in these church schools and other places, we found, that we needed a new legal system in order to put the Vatican and the Queen of England and others on trial, which we eventually did, as you know, successfully. And we saw a lot of congruence between international law concept and common law, which basically says, there's fundamental liberties that anyone is accountable for violating. Even if you're a Queen of England, even if you're a Pope, you're accountable under the law for your actions. But that's all common law, and it's only when people practice those rights and know about them that they really come into being.
So most people will be aware of the statute law itself, because that's what most of us are governed with worldwide, or we think we are, I guess, if you want to put it that way. But compared to common law itself, common law being the law of the land, but the actual statute law, which goes back a long, long time ago, of the law of the sea. How did the law of the sea basically infiltrate itself onto the land and has itself perched here when we already have common law itself? And it seems to obviously get swept under the carpet for hundreds of years.
Well, it's an old battle going back thousands of years between the people trying to just live, in their own way, and then elites, self-imposed elites through war or conquest or religion or however they brainwash people, get them to think that, we have to follow the orders of the small elite who have our best interests at heart. So, I actually, in my book, Common Law Training Manual, Establishing the Reign of Natural Liberty, Common Law Training Manual, we lay out in that kind of the origin of this whole thing. And like you say, rulers always try to convince us the law simply consists of their statutes. The king or the pope will bring in a law and everyone obeys it. But in England, for example, for many centuries, and in Ireland as well, when it was under the British heel, the whole system of the crown was always trying to absorb the natural rights of people and their own, what are called in England, they had like shire courts. The shire were like the local villages. And they had their own courts where they would try each other for offenses. They had their own sheriffs. As a matter of fact, the word sheriff comes from a shire reeve. The reeve was the local headman, and he, maintained the peace and prosecuted people locally. But then sometime in the Middle Ages, the king moved in and took over the sheriff and made him the local tax collector. And so the crown is always trying to grab these things and make it an appendage of the state. And so there's been that constant battle. And the most successful outcome in terms of the rights of the people was, of course, in the French and the American revolutions. And this was also said in the Irish Declaration of Independence in 1916, right? The idea that the people have inherent liberties and no ruler can take them away without people's lawful consent, and that you can't be tried for something except in a court, a trial by jury by your peers. All of these basic Magna Carta ideas, they keep trying to erase from our memory all the time, right? So what we're doing right now is really important because the state has told everybody, you have to quarantine, you have to mask, you have to distance, without really any information, against reason, against our health. And so people are starkly given this choice. You either go along, or if you use your rational mind in question, you immediately become some kind of enemy of the state. And then people have to choose what they're going to serve. And then you're basically in a civil war where you're saying to the state, no, we're not going to go along. We have our own system of law. And we've had some success already, which I can talk about that on the ground, resisting these COVID restrictions using common law.
Before I get into that, my understanding of the statute of law is kind of like a contractual agreement. They're like corporations, companies, for want of a better word. And if you, suppose without getting into a long story, but if you actually basically do not get into a contract with these kind of people, then you can stick to your common law rights. And the average police officer or judge, actually, believe it or not, won't have any idea of the ins and outs of the actual common law. And there's things like, as far as I know, you're aware of, you can get obviously common law cards with registration number and stuff on it to say, look, if you need to be stopped in the street by a police officer. I mean, it's all about the wording and the trickery. If you go back to the days of your actual, literally since you've been conceived and you come out of the womb, the birth cert, that goes back to the whole lot of it is the birth cert was what an inception or deception, I should say, that has been since the day you were born. And not many people know that's your kind of, I don't know, your straw man or your fictional character that that is going throughout our life. And could you go a small bit of detail into that as well as to how people can break away from that? Because most people actually won't be aware of that. This fictional character, things like Mr. and Mrs. and is not the same as, Kevin Annett and Mr. Kevin Annett are completely two different things.
Well, even the whole concept of a name, in the Bible, you might notice that somebody's trying to find out the name of God, and God's talking to somebody, I guess it's Moses or somebody. God says, I have no name, I am who I am. Because the term name comes from an old Hebrew word, meaning it's the plaque you hang on the neck of a slave to show who owns him. Because in your natural state, you don't have a name, you are just you, right? And you notice whenever the cops stop you or you go to court on a summons of some kind, the first thing they ask you is, what's your name? Are you so-and-so? Are you Chris Ryan? Okay. The minute you say yes, you've entered into their jurisdiction, because you're saying yes, not to the flesh and blood you. You're saying yes to that corporation created in your name when your parents registered you at birth, because you're registered as a corporation, And when you're in that corporate world, the only way anyone has any authority over you is, like you say, if you're in a contractual relationship. So you can very easily outmaneuver them if you have this knowledge, because if a cop says to you, are you Chris Ryan? The first thing you say is, well, before I answer that, you have to show me the contractual relationship we're in whereby you have the authority to ask me that, right? Show me the contract. They can't. They probably won't even know what the hell you're talking about most of the time, because the cops aren't trained in this stuff. They're just statute enforcers, right? So the other thing you can simply do, as we're doing in Canada, 5 years ago, we formed, and there was a convention establishing a republic. And we're in a transitional stage with that, but the point is that people now in Canada can stand outside Crown jurisdiction. And that's what we say to police now. I'm not a citizen of Canada. Here's my citizenship card. I'm outside your jurisdiction altogether. At that point, they have no authority over you. It's not that they can't target you and harass you, but legally and lawfully, they have no leg to stand on, because you've opted out of the system, which anyone can do. We just don't think we can. So that knowledge gives us great power. Now, in terms of how there's a lot of stuff out there, people's different ideas about how you get out of the system, how you revoke your birth registration and all that stuff. And I think all that stuff should be tried because there isn't one answer. Different things will work in different situations, right? So you've got to be kind of flexible in the tactics you use. But we're all touching the elephant from different perspectives. And the bottom line is that you break them right here. As soon as you resolve in your mind and heart that you're not part of this anymore, you simply declare that, but not just as an individual. The advantage of what we're doing in Canada with the model of a republic is that I'm not going up against the state one-on-one, which is usually a problem because they love that. They love when a person will defy them because then they'll whack them hard and use them as an example to scare people. When people say I'm not paying income tax or whatever, they'll often throw them in jail or put a lien on their bank account or something. And that just scares people. But if as a group, and this is what we've done in these common law republic assemblies we formed, 12 or more people sign a charter, they become a governing body. They become like a legislature and a court. They can pass laws like we did on September 4th, a law across Canada that banned COVID measures. It said these measures are illegal and we don't have to cooperate with them. We've handed cops and other officials that document and they've stood back because they know it's lawful because people have decided it among themselves. We can form our own laws. So as a group, when you say that, we passed another law that said we are not subject to the authority of any of this. And we are, as a group, as a community, we're not paying federal taxes. We're withdrawing from the system. At that point, they can't touch you because it's the will of the people, which even rulers will acknowledge they can't touch. They just got to brainwash people to think they don't have that option. And so we found on the ground it works. As a matter of fact, the other day, I was in Victoria, which is on the west coast of Canada, and in British Columbia, and we were having a picket outside this medical office where they just brought in a ruling that mandatory masking has to occur everywhere in the province. Well, I went up to the cop. He was actually not just a flunky, but he was a fairly senior sergeant in the Victoria Force. And I said, our people are defined masking, and if there's threats being issued against them, what do we do? As a policeman, I'm asking, what do we do? And I showed him our law passed on September 4th, revoking the COVID measures. He read it and he said, well, I'll just show them this. So, I mean, that was quite an amazing admission because if it was bogus, he would have just said, this is bullshit. Like, don't even try using this. But He said, just show them this because they're acknowledging that when people through their own free will decide to opt out of something and they're not harming anybody, it's not against the law. And that's an amazing power we all have. But the first step when we're forming these assemblies is people keep saying, can we do this? Is it lawful? Are we going to get in trouble? Am I going to lose my medical coverage or whatever, right? And so the first question I always say to them is, do you think it's lawful? Because you've got to be sovereign in your own mind first. You've got to take back your mind from the way we've all been raised to think in a subservient way. So, I mean, this is all a huge learning, but at least it's given people an alternative and a way they can not go along with this stuff, right?
So if we set a scenario up that you're walking down the road in Canada, I'm walking down the street in London somewhere, and the police, even while it's not mandatory to walk out in the street yet, but that's what they'll try and enforce in time to come, obviously, like Poland, Spain, Italy, a couple of these places, as soon as you walk outside your front door, you have to have it on you straight away. A friend of mine is actually in Poland and he has exemptions for a mask. And he's been stopped and he said the authorities under no circumstances were not even allowing exemptions they've been taught him at this stage. And he says the Polish police are quite corrupt over there. He's known other cases where they simply it's actually not worth it. He says you're better off to put it on, because what they'll do is they won't just fine you or put you in jail for a couple of days or whatever the case is. They'll actually go into your bank accounts and actually freeze your bank accounts as well. And to get that back, he says, is unbelievably difficult. So that's the measures that's going on there. But in certain places, if you were to say, look, I am under common law, I don't, haven't done any contractual agreement, if you want to put it that way, Tom, they're obviously bullied by tactics. They will bully you, just like police and just like certain judges will try to bully you, and they're unaware of the circumstances themselves at times. How do you get out of these? Because obviously the biggest indicator for all this scam that's been going on for the past couple of months is fear behind it all. People are fear and of the consequence that might come of their action, and because of the perception and information, of course, they're reading from the MSM and TV and so on, and governments are laying out in front of them. what do you do simply if you are in a street situation? You say, I'm not contracting with you, basically. I'm not going to wear a mask because I'm a living human, breathing human being, either that be a male or female. What do you do in those circumstances? Do you just, get thrown in the back of the wagon and fight it later? Or what?
Well,
yeah.
Don't forget, these stories on the corporate media are circulated to keep people afraid. My experience of the system, like, as you know, I've been fighting church and state for over a quarter century on these crimes, and I've never been sued once. They don't like to bring attention to people who are fighting the system. It makes martyrs, right? And they lose credibility that way. So the state doesn't rule by physical force. Fundamentally, it rules through that people think it's legitimate. And once people don't think it is anymore, their power starts falling. That's, we often quote Sun Tzu in The Art of War. He says, you don't outfight your enemy, you outthink them, you outmaneuver them. And so in this situation, it's pretty simple. First of all, you don't do anything by yourself. We're in a different regime now all over the world. It's not what we grew up with. It's a war. Really, it's a war to the death. This is a corporatocracy versus people's self-governance. And once we know that, then everything we do has to be strategic. So you don't just go walking on the street. You get 5 friends and you go walking down the street, right? And you train them beforehand what to say. And then when they're stopped, first of all, police don't like groups, right? They don't have a protocol for how to deal with that unless it's a riot, right? So they feel a bit on the defensive. But very peacefully, you say, as a group, we're just not cooperating. And as a matter of fact, in Canada, when we talk to the police, we educate them and we say, you should come to our common law workshop. You should take out, we put out a stand down order to all the officials and cops and members of parliament in Canada saying, revoke your oath of allegiance to Queen Elizabeth, because that's their only pledge of allegiance, to her, not to the people. And take a pledge to a constitution and a republic. So it's a battle for hearts and minds all the time. And every opportunity is a chance to affect that. Police are just people like us, by and large. They're just their dads, their husbands. They can be appealed to, and we found that works, especially in the States where the police are locally elected, county sheriffs, and they're answerable to the electorate, right? So they can easily be reached. We've had many cases of sheriffs helping people in America, saying we're not going to, violate people's constitutional rights and that kind of thing. And so it works. It works a lot. And so just treat them as human beings and talk to them. Don't approach it defensively like, uh-oh, I better cooperate or I'm going to get in trouble. That's what Sun Tzu says, surrendering your chi, your energy, handing it over. You even do that in a protest. It can be as militant as you like, but you're still asking for something from the state. What we're doing is we're not asking for anything. We're taking it back. We're saying we are establishing new laws. We are establishing these assemblies to govern our communities. And you had the example historically in Ireland, when during the Civil War, the Republican movement set up Brehon courts, their own courts of law outside the Crown courts, right? They had their own institutions operating independently alongside the British system. That's exactly what we're doing in Canada, just replicating your history. And in America and other places where the empire is being successfully, thrown out, is you have to use those tactics of self-reliance. And it's a hard thing for people to learn right away, but once they get it, it starts spreading like a virus, this idea, right? And you're finding that all over the world. You're seeing people do common law workshops. I've seen this explode in the last 10 years. Some of it had to do with the example we set when we convened the common law court trial that forced Pope Benedict to step down, and 3 other cardinals, including Sean Brady in Ireland. We forced him out because it was irrefutable, the evidence. Our common law court did that. So the amazing thing, and the reason why Ratzinger is still hiding out in the Vatican, 12 years later, is because he knows that any court of law can issue an arrest warrant based on a citizen verdict out of a citizen or a common law court. So we have tremendous power. We just have to exercise it, and then we'll see that what a sleeping giant the human race is when it comes to their liberties.
And I suppose it is difficult for people to wrap their head around how, like you've mentioned earlier, is this okay? Is this somewhat lawful? Or, are we going to get charged for what we're doing? And all comes back to like taking sovereignty over yourself again.
Right.
In the fact of, like we talked about the contractual agreements and all that, but I suppose for the average person to get through life, be it your bank account, your passport, your car license, everything seems to be all tied into this system. How do you kind of disconnect yourself from this system? But obviously part of that you kind of need at the same time. For example, if you're working for somebody, they won't pay you cash anymore. They'll want to pay you through a bank account, which is sort of a contract area. I mean, does it go back to, I've heard a lot of people talk about that you can obviously take ownership over your birth cert. And is it a case if you take ownership over your birth cert, well then, regardless if you're Mr. Ryan on your bank card or Mr. Ryan on your passport, the fact you've actually saying I've taken ownership of this now, so I own this fictional name, does that govern all those areas then to proceed?
Yeah, I think different things work. For example, there's a common law court system in England where they get people to register with them. And so you're registered, but outside the system, right? In a more basic way in your own community, what you do, and we're doing this all over Canada, we find local merchants, store owners, people who are willing to get out, still willing to accept money, they don't like the COVID measures. And you start patronizing them and tell everyone to support their business, right? And then it becomes profitable for them to not go along with the system. We build up our community power that way. So if you want, and we have safe houses and alternative people off the grid on the land, building independent, like farming communities. And we need a food base. You need to start creating those systems independently of what exists now. So all of that is really important, because when the boot comes down more, you need those alternatives, because all the talk and all the paper in the world is not going to really be an effective way to resist. We have to think beyond just the creating the paper trail to enacting individually, to how as a community do we set up something different. And that's really our big focus. And there's so many hours in the day, and you got to put it into something that's going to create long-term alternatives. And that's really what we try to do all the time.
I'm hearing a lot lately of cases in Ireland and cases in England of where individuals, they need help in the hospital itself. Nothing got to do with the COVID nonsense that's going on, but they might need surgery in their arm, keyhole surgery, a few people, different various situations like that. They don't want anything got to do with the testing, or they don't believe any of the COVID measures that are going on, but they're being told pretty much at the door or beforehand in a letter, under no circumstance can you enter our hospital, even though we know you really need this procedure to be done. But unless you get the test, unless you go along with our agreements, you cannot set foot inside this hospital itself, which is insane. And people are genuinely, talking to me, said they're in fear over, they're crying, they're breaking down. They're like, we don't know what to do. We feel this enforcement to take these tests that we really don't trust anything got to do with these tests, but I really need this operation. I mean, is there anything regards common law in that situation that people can get around?
Well, it makes it all the more vital in situations of life and death and health for us to be resisting this. And to give you an example, in a community just up the road from where I am on Vancouver Island, we found 2 doctors in town who were willing not to go along with masking or anything. And they said, as soon as we do that, though, we're going to get targeted by our professional association, because the doctors across Canada have said you can't refuse masking even in health conditions, which is absurd, criminal for the doctors to say that, but we see they're going along. So we find individuals find a few who aren't willing to go along, and then think, how can we support you, right? If they threaten you with your license, how do we mount protests? How do we show them that they're gonna pay if they come down on doctors who are trying to do the right thing? So it's like basic community organizing skills. You build up the power and confidence of people from the grassroots. There aren't quick fix solutions for this. And it's unfortunate because people are under the gun right now. They're saying, what's going to happen by Christmas? They might bring in the mandatory vaccinations. It's all true, but we can't panic, because over the long run, we have the advantage. We have the people, we have the law, we have justice on our side. It's a matter of keeping your head and sticking to a strategy that works. When we find this does work, the system knows how to respond quickly. They learn from their mistakes. Unfortunately, we don't. People tend to not learn from their experiences unless it's pointed out. And so, we have to just, it's like in a battle, there's no final outcome. everything can be used to our advantage, even when, and we've had this experience, people being sent into our assemblies to disrupt, to spread rumors, the typical kind of black ops methods, right? In one group, there was an assembly of almost 80 people they were meeting, and these two operatives destroyed it in the space of a couple of weeks. They just got it so nobody trusted anyone else, and they were all frightened. You know, they were said, "Oh, you're all going to get arrested if you come to this assembly." So out of that, there was only about half a dozen people left. But those 6 people have now rebuilt it to 30 very solid people because they learned from that experience. They said, okay, here's how they're going to come at us. Screw them. I'm even more determined to make this work. So what that operative did is actually help us because they sifted out, they separated the people who would run easily from the people who were solid. And you see, that helped us. So everything can be turned to our advantage if we just keep the long term in mind and think, okay, look at how it strengthened us. Don't, you know, people, it's easy to complain and point fingers, but I say to anyone who has a criticism of anything we're doing, give an alternative. Fine, here's the criticism, but part B to that is give your own alternative. What do you think we should be doing? And that's a litmus test to see if they're just a chronic complainer or they seriously want to do something. So all of that has to be used in what we're doing because it's a way that people feel they have the power. And once you trigger that in people, the state really can't do anything except naked repression, which loses them power even quicker. When they have to use violence, it's an admission of weakness on their part and really defeat ultimately.
Yeah, well, speaking of violence and unnecessary violence, I was at a protest about a month ago or so in Trafalgar Square, London, where there was fantastic speakers talking about, you know, obviously against anti-lockdown, against the 5G, against all the coronavirus measures that is, you know, being enforced upon the people. About 45,000 people or so there. It went for about 2.5 hours or so. Extremely peaceful. You could feel the love and vibrations to the crowd and the positivity. Everybody is having a great day out. And of course, it was going a bit too well. And then, of course, the riot police just bolted around the corner of nowhere. Everybody was not doing one thing, everything acting peacefully. They bolted around the corner and literally just barged through everybody, knocking old women out of the way, blood and noses cut and everything like that for no good reason whatsoever. It's like they had to just be there so the BBC and other organisations would get a good snapshot and everything. Then, of course, after that, they said it all has been resolved in the meantime, but they said afterwards that, we can have no more protests now because of the violence that these, you know, so-called anti-lockdowns, of course. And they've just said in the last week, they've just said in the last week or so that no more than 2 people can protest now. So yeah, we're going to be standing outside number 10 with our little placards to all 2 of us. it's
no, that's crazy. I mean, England, of course, has a long tradition of doing that, but you know, the thing is there that by doing that, they've swelled our ranks enormously, right? Because a lot of ordinary people who aren't political and just see that and they go, what the hell is going on? So they really helped us by doing that and made those 45,000 even more determined. But think, if those 45,000 people, each one of them had said, okay, no more taxes, we're not paying taxes, we're not voting, we're not doing anything, we're pulling out of the system. If that many people did that, it would collapse. If they made it so that the system didn't operate, you know, wanting to declare general strike and nobody go to work, just shut the whole thing down and it wouldn't be able to work, right? And so think if people could not think beyond mere protest, because again, your energy is you're asking for something, right? Now you're coming together to make a statement, that's positive, but ultimately at the end of the game, you're asking for something and we can't ask for anything. We create it ourselves. That's all the message we got to teach our people over and over, right?
So regards citizens arrest, talk us through with citizens arrest. How easily or difficult is it for somebody to go and do that?
I don't know the law in Ireland. I say within the Crown jurisdiction, in Canada, the citizen arrest laws have actually been expanded. So traditionally, if you have seen a crime occur, you have the right to detain that person using what's called reasonable force. So if they grabbed an old lady's purse and just ran, okay, you can trip them, but you can't start beating them up. You got to detain them and then call the cops and have them arrested. Okay. In Canada, even if you suspect that a crime has gone on, you can detain the people. Now, you know, this was great because we used that law. Said every Catholic priest in Canada and around the world has taken an oath according to the policy of crimen satanus, which says that when children are raped, the police are not to be told. That's accounted for incredible suffering. It's a criminal conspiracy, really, to protect child rapists. So we said, we suspect this priest is doing that, so we're going to perform a citizen arrest on him. When we leaked that, that was just prior, the church panicked because they knew that they could all be arrested, right, by all these citizens, right? We're not going to let you near children because we know that you have to protect the Vatican policy. So they collapsed within 2 weeks. They were issuing apologies. They were, so that one piece of knowledge was an enormous lever way beyond power of our numbers, right? And that's how we can use these laws, right? So in a nutshell, yeah, citizen arrest gives people that. I don't know, you'd have to check, the statute in Ireland, but the point is, under common law, you have the right to do that. Anyway, it's called reasonable force. There's a thing in common law going back many centuries, and especially in America, there have been many court cases about this, called a necessity defense. So, you can break the law for a higher necessity. Let's say there's a kid in a burning house, you can break in to save the child's life. And obviously, you're not going to be prosecuted for vandalism, right? It was a higher necessity allowing you to break the law. It's the same with this. We cannot have 5G towers. We cannot have these COVID measures because it's threatening our health. So the higher law requires that we take down these towers. And in fact, we have friends in the Netherlands, and they issued a notice to the local town council. There were 8 5G towers going up. They said, you have 30 days to remove that, or we will, to protect our health. And we didn't hear from them, so they went in and took the towers down. The police didn't do anything because they'd given them lawful notice and they didn't respond. They didn't contest what they were doing. So that's the power. And yeah, the citizen arrest laws are part of that. You can arrest anybody who you think is going to harm you, including the mayor who brings in those statutes, the TSOC, whoever, is going to bring in laws that threaten the people. You can arrest them. They're liable under the law for doing that.
And as far as the common law court itself, you spoke, obviously it takes 12 people to come together. Can these be any individual 12 people? Randomly, you don't have to know them. And in a court situation then, if the person is, to be found guilty or innocent, is it a unanimous decision? Do all 12 have to agree to the verdict? And can there be a retrial?
Okay, the whole procedure in a common law court is laid out in this book, and you can get it on Amazon. Common law training manual. Just put in my name, Annett. Due process in the common law court, it follows natural law, and it says when people, like we did in the case against Joe Ratzinger, we put out a call for citizen jurors. We had 58 of them linked by Zoom and Skype, right? And you can't, in fact, there's a jury selection process, so each side gets to choose the jurors. You've seen that in movies, right? In the States, they have this. So you can't just bring your friends together and have a lynching of somebody you don't like, right? It's got to follow due process. And the 12 people, it's got to be unanimous decision. It can't be influenced. They're given all the facts, and it's the belief that men and women can come to a just verdict based on reason. It's the same way 12 people can sign a charter and form a common law assembly that governs themselves, because that's where they reside in a sovereign. The people are sovereign, not one person. So that sovereign ability means they can bring in a just verdict. The verdict is got to be unanimous and it's binding. There's a thing in common law, it's called stare decisis, which in Latin means the decision stands. So traditionally in common law, it couldn't be appealed because it was a just verdict, and it would stand. Now later, and that's the double indemnity rule too, you can't be tried twice for the same crime, which helps a lot of criminals get away with a lot of stuff. But it's again the idea that there's an assumption of innocence here, not guilt. Whereas we're in a system now where everyone's assumed to be guilty by the state, and common law is and their jury trial, it's based on the opposite notion. Is the state has to prove that you're guilty of something, otherwise you're assumed to be innocent. I mean, that's basic, right?
Yeah. And you also, which you briefly touched on as well, I believe it was back in 2010 in Dublin, I believe you formed the ITCCS. and
Yeah.
which later went on. It was, I think, about 2 years later. So the ICLCJ. If you could explain to people what that means.
Well, ITCC, International Tribunal of Crimes of Church and State, and that actually came. I was in Italy in 2009. Actually did a little exorcism outside the Vatican, and then that's a great story because a tornado hit Rome the next day, and which kind of impressed my friends. But it was interesting because that same week, the first news reports came on Europe about Ratzinger ordering the cover-up of crimes against children to his bishops. So something got shaken loose there. But folks in Ireland heard about that and invited her to some forums in Dublin. And there was a woman, Rosaline Rogers, the church where they did horrible experiments, including Rosaline. And so she was campaigning for justice. And we were sitting there in North Dublin in a community hall. We were saying, you know, we hear these stories all over the world. We're facing a big multinational corporation called the Church of Rome. We need to be organized across borders. And so we set up the tribunal there. And we eventually, and it's still active in 9 different countries. But out of that tribunal, 2 years later, was formed this International Common Law Court of Justice, and initially convened in Brussels, but then we had to kind of go off the radar because there were a lot of attacks happening. We had an advisor, a guy who helped set it up. His name's Baltasar Garzon, and you might look him up. He's a really neat guy in Spain. He's a former judge in Spain who actually brought charges against Pinochet, the Chilean dictator. But Baltasar's problem from the point of view of the Spanish government is that he then went after the Catholic Church. And as you know, this present Pope did the same thing. The Catholic Church used to traffic children of political prisoners being held in the Franco dictatorship in Argentina, where the present Pope was the Archbishop. They would grab the children of the people they had thrown in prison and just traffic them and make a lot of money off them. And so anyway, Garzon tried to do that. He tried to bring a case against the Vatican, and boom, he suddenly found himself thrown off the bench. But he was there to advise us about how to go about this stuff and the power of common law. Even though they don't call it that, there's different names for it, but it's really the law of nature, the inherent ability of people to judge things for themselves and outside government statute, right? And so what that did, there were 2 court cases brought. The first one was very historic because even though the Spanish government had come down on Garzon, they looked at the docket of all of our evidence linking Ratzinger with all of these crimes and the role of the Catholic Church historically in, just killing children and getting away with it. In Tuam in Ireland, they found that cistern with the skeletons of 800 little babies, right? I mean, a long history of this genocide. So anyway, the Spanish government looked at that, the docket of evidence we had. We deliberately sent it to them, and Garzon sent it to some of his friends in the judicial system. And 5 days before Ratzinger resigned, he resigned February 11th, 2013. 5 days before that, the Spanish government, Eduardo de Baruga, he was the ambassador to the Vatican, he issued a diplomatic note to trying to remember the Secretary of State's name at the time. He also resigned as cardinal after it came out, but it told this guy, the Secretary of State, that Ratzinger could face arrest if he came to Spain based on what they saw. 5 days later, he resigns, for quote, health reasons, but then he hasn't left the Vatican since because he knew he was guilty. And then after that, Tarcisio Bertone, he was that's the guy. He was Cardinal, Vatican Secretary of State. He steps down, as does Sean Brady in Ireland, and the head of the Jesuits, Adolfo Pichon. He announces that he's stepping down. First time a Jesuit leader had ever done that. So all of these pins started falling, right? And it's because of the power of that truth coming out, and that was just a citizens' tribunal. But it created, look at the shockwave since then. They brought in the present guy, Bergoglio, to put the smiley facelift on the Vatican to make it seem like they were doing something, when in fact the first thing he did is he re-entrenched the policy of crimen that says all bishops are to, and every Catholic in the world is not to report child rape. So I mean, it's all that tsunami we created that's still spreading, and that's again going back to that theme, the power people have, and so anyone anywhere can convene those kinds of inquiries. We encourage people to do that all the time, right?
And Ratzinger is still a fugitive on the run, but on a run inside the Vatican.
Yeah, he's still there. Which again, an admission of guilt, right?
It's amazing. What are you doing yourself currently? I know you're very busy. How's your work progressing throughout this? I know, extremely busy, and probably even more busy. So in the past couple of months, a lot of people are coming to you with the common law situation as well. And you've already mentioned some successes you have. What's in the pipeline going forward as well?
Well, I've never, Chris, in all the work I've done over the years, I've never had this kind of success, seriously, since March and the COVID measures were brought in. We can't keep up with the number of people volunteering, saying, come on, let's form local assemblies. I want to fight this thing. I can see this groundswell of outrage building everywhere. And I've been organized, like on the West Coast alone, I've helped organize 11 assemblies since March. And some of them have been taken down, others are carrying on. But one of the problems on the West Coast we find is the Chinese presence, because China is buying up the whole country. And in fact, Trudeau, the Prime Minister, even allows China to station their troops on Canadian soil now. We see military maneuvers happening all up and down the West Coast. And the Superport in Prince Rupert, where they're bringing in massive numbers of Chinese people to kind of illegally colonize the North. They're grabbing the liquid natural gas, the hydroelectricity, all of this stuff. And they are involved. Our evidence shows that they're involved in a lot of the disappearances of Native families. They're going missing. They're just driving people off the way the British used to do, and they just terrorize people off the land to get the resources. So I mean, this is a pretty serious situation here, on the West Coast. But I'm really going all over the country helping people do this. I've never been busier, and like I say, the idea of a republic is really catching on. We've got assemblies now in almost 50 different communities across the country. Canada is difficult. It's a vast territory. It's not like Ireland or England where you can drive across, in a day or two. Over a week to drive across Canada, driving the whole border almost. So it's hard in that way. We do a lot of Zoom calls. We do a lot of kind of online stuff. The important thing we say is, because it's so big, people have to take responsibility in their own communities. So that's a lot of what I've been doing. An usual gamut of other things, writing more books and interviews and all of the stuff we need to keep doing, right?
Exactly. What do you say to people moving forward, in the sense of, where should people, even with the vast amount of information that we got from yourself and others out there, what's the first process in people starting to say, hey, hang on, right, I want to actually start, and there's a lot of information, but I don't know what's step 1, 2, 3, and 4, etc. What's the first port of call people should go to?
Well, first thing they should do is get educated to some degree. And if you go to our website, Republic of Kanata, Kanata, republicofkanata.ca, you'll see kind of a basic layout. You can adapt that information to your own situation. I mean, supposedly Ireland is a republic, at least in the south. Yeah. And, but we know that
by Brussels.
Well, yeah, exactly. So like in America, we say to people, you've got to restore your own republic. You've got to go back to the original vision and practice. And that only happens locally when people set it up. So on that site, you can get copies of the charter people signed to form an assembly. Get 12 people together, a workshop first. We often encourage people to form cell groups of 3 people first, to just meet in their homes, get to know each other, build up trust. 4 of those groups get together and form. We find if you announce an assembly too soon, when people aren't educated, not only does it get infiltrated, but people don't know what they're doing. They don't feel confident. You've got to have under your belt first. So we say do that first, but then take the assembly and start passing laws. Set up your own common law sheriffs, and we have a whole training program for how to do that. So people can write to me. I've got a Proton Mail account now, angelfire101@protonmail.com. And a lot of the background to this, you probably have my other site, murderbydecree.com, but that gives you some background about showing the history of how we've won using these tactics. It isn't just talking. It's worked in the real world. It's had an impact. And I think that's one of the reasons that the smear campaign on me is really getting ratcheted up again, right? It's a sign of the success we're having, because they're recycling all these old RCMP smears on me from 15 years ago, right? which is again a sign of they're on the defensive when they have to start name calling and acting like children. So I think it's a good sign, and I'm hopeful that, but people need to take this and run with it. They can't just rely on somebody else to do it for them, right?
Exactly. I mean, you said it right there. Was you're poking the bear with the stick, because censorship obviously has gone through the roof, and some of the big names are all of a sudden being taken down overnight. Not because of so-called misinformation, as they would like to label it as. It's because they're absolutely scared of the truth in Silicon Valley and what the message is actually getting out worldwide. So the easiest thing is don't debate these people. Of course, just cut them off straight away. You're gone overnight. Your livelihoods, your income, maybe through Patreon, whatever the case is. You're gone. So it just shows you're doing something right. I even done an interview myself a couple of weeks ago with David Icke, and I put up on YouTube, and within 5 hours, boom, gone. Oh, yeah. I'm surprised it even lasted 5 hours. But I just woke up in the morning with a smile on my face, instead of going, oh shit, my interview was gone. It's still on BitChute and other places people can find it, but it's just, you're doing something right. Because these people have no answers, and they're running scared of the truth of, obviously the people uniting together. That's the last thing they want. It goes back to the old tactic of divide and conquer. And that's what they're trying to do. It's been more and more evident these past couple of months for people to wake up and see. But people are waking up, but unfortunately not enough are waking up. But it's definitely a positivity, if there's any positivity to come out of COVID, is what you're doing, for example, and you can just see by how busy you are with the common laws and all the other stuff that you're doing as well. And it is woken up more people to what's actually really going on, question things worldwide compared to they were ever questioning about 12 months ago.
Yeah, we got to thank the police state for what they're doing. They're swelling our ranks tremendously. So It's like that yin yang thing. Your enemy is actually your ally if you use him properly, right?
Exactly. And Kevin, before we wind it down, is there anything that people should know, maybe we haven't covered, that you think is a vital aspect regarding common law today? We know we can go to your books and your sites and stuff, but just for the people listening or watching, is there anything you think is vital, maybe we left out, that is crucial people should know as well?
Well, you just named it a little while ago. You said, they rule through fear and ignorance. People, those are the two means by which they rule the majority: fear and ignorance. And that divides us against each other. But once we overcome that with knowledge and the feeling that we can do it, you got to give people small victories. And I find that with the work we do. One of our sheriffs on the East Coast, we have a pretty extensive assembly on all the maritime provinces on the Atlantic coast of Canada. And the sheriff, Andrew, and his wife, Shannon, were targeted by Children's Aid. They came and tried to grab their children. Okay, so we had an urgent response network, and this is important to set up in your community. 5 or 10 people who, from one phone call, will suddenly go where there's trouble and help the person. We had 8 people there within 20 minutes, and they stood down when they saw that he had that kind of support. Otherwise, the kids would have been gone. So we need that. That ability to cover each other's backs. We've got to prove that. And once you do that, people get more confident, say, okay, I know I'm not as vulnerable here, right? And that's why I always like to talk about my story, because I'm still at it and I'm alive, right? What does that tell you, right? They have a lot less power than we think. It's like the saying we use in our assemblies: nothing is ever done to us by anybody. It's done with us. It's done with our consent. They can pass all the laws they want, all the statutes or declarations. If we don't respond, they're just words. These things are imposed on us by our consent and compliance. If we don't cooperate, it doesn't exist. And so that's the principle we've got to instill in people. But the best way you learn it is from your experience. So we, like Sun Tzu says in the Art of War, don't avoid conflict. Bring people into conflict, because that's how your troops learn. That's how you learn about the enemy and get stronger from them. It's like you don't avoid a germ. You want context to build up your antibodies, right? In this spiritual political struggle we're in, you want contact with that because it builds up our inner defenses, or our antibodies, if you like, right? So I would say to people, just follow those basic common sense rules, because that's what common law is, common sense. And common reason. And so that's kind of the general message I'd leave. Also want to announce we have now 6 p.m. Eastern, which I think is 11 p.m. Greenwich time. Here we stand, one word. And that has a lot of our frontline people. All our shows are archived on that site going back 5 years. It's got a lot of people who are on the line, like Andrew and Shannon, who I mentioned, fighting the apprehension of their children, describing the lessons we've learned. So it's a good thing to listen to as well. But like I say, write to me. angelfire101@protonmail.com.
Perfect. And I'll leave all the links in the description below for people that can easily click on, and if they want to find you and find out more, or actually, write you and contact you personally themselves.
Sure.
So, Kevin, it's been a pleasure again, and I know you're a busy man, so thanks for taking the time out today for coming back on the show again.
Well, I hope to get over there sometime when this nonsense is through, and I always love being there. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
I'll be the same. It's like if the mandatory testing or vaccine comes in, that stops me from flying, because I'm not going to go through any of those ridiculous measures. So onwards and upwards, keep fighting the good battle. And as I say, don't fight him, but outthink him. Yeah, exactly. So thanks again, Kevin, for your time today.
Thank you, Chris. I'll talk to you again.
Will do, Kevin. Thanks very much.
Okay.
You've been watching and listening to Mind Wars. Please like, share, and subscribe. Until next time, see you then.